right, well, thank you for coming out tonight. And as Andrew said, we will be studying 1 John chapter 3. Let's see how to do this. And starting in verse 11. What I'd like to do is really break this up into two sections tonight. Chapter 3, verse 11 through 18 kind of goes together, and I've titled that section kind of Love One Another, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what we just sang about here, that common love, and why we should have that, really. And that's what I kind of want to get out of this tonight. Why is it important that we have this common love for another, and what does that say about us as Christians? What does that say about our relationship with God, having this brotherly love? Well, what is John's message for us tonight? If you've read this at all, and even the first verse here in chapter 11, you'll see he plainly states in the beginning, this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Now, most of you have been here since we started this study in 1 John, and if you recall, maybe I think the second week when we studied chapter 1, you might remember verse 5. And in verse 5, John says, "This is the message that we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." So, what is John's message for us? Are these competing ideas? I think we'll see tonight after our study that these are really related to each other and are harmoniously joined. They're not saying two different things as they might appear to be on the surface, that we should have love for one another, and also that God is light, God is pure light, he is no darkness, and why that relates to our love for the brethren. I want to do kind of a verse-by-verse study. If you have any comments, please jump in. I don't intend this to be a preaching, an exercise where I'm just up here talking to myself. I encourage your feedback, and it would help me out greatly as well. So again, starting our study of verse 11 here, "For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another." So my question for you is, what is the beginning? The beginning of what? What is John talking about here in the beginning? And if you haven't thought of it, I've got two choices that you might choose from. Two of the most common views of this is that the beginning refers to the beginning of your Christian walk, or the beginning could mean the beginning of the gospel or Jesus' ministry. And the latter is really the what is most commonly taken is what John is talking about. This is the beginning. Since the beginning, we have heard that we should love one another. And what backs that up is if you go into the Gospel of John, verse 13 and 34, this is Jesus talking, John recalling this and telling us about this. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, and you are to love one another." And so that marks a specific time, a specific place as a beginning, and we think that this is what John is referencing at this time.
He uses the beginning concept in the very first verse of this letter, and also the very first verse of the Gospel of Christ. So in the beginning was the Word, and also that which you heard from the beginning.
Right.
So he likes his word.
So not only, but yeah, just the beginning's not always talking about the beginning of the universe. It's different beginnings, and can be the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, the beginning of the gospel, the good word. Also note that this love between disciples was new and unique at the time, right? Jesus brought this ministry, this brotherly love, the love they had for Christ, because it came from Jesus and dwelt among the disciples, and they were able to love each other. No one else could have possibly had this kind of love before Jesus came, right? So it kind of makes sense, and it's why people, and I think why we'll see, the world was somewhat confused by it. It was foreign to the world. Verse 12, we should not be like Cain, who was the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because of his own deeds. His own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. So you have to think to yourself, now why is John bringing up Cain at this time, right? Why would he choose to use this example? Does anyone have any ideas of why Cain? Sarah?
Because they were brothers and they're very, very close connected, and they should have a common love
Okay,
between their families.
that's good. I didn't really think about that, but yeah, they should love each other as brothers, actual brothers. So that's a good negative example to give. Here's two brothers that don't love each other. Don't be like Cain.
This was the exact opposite of the first verse.
Right? A good contradiction. It's a familiar story. A lot of people would be familiar with the story of Cain and Abel. So as you're trying to get your point across and trying to teach someone a new concept, it helps to pull in something that they are familiar with, to build upon, right? So that's thinking there why he's using this example of Cain. Yes?
An interesting little side point here, not to delay things, but a lot of people say, well, Cain and Abel, the creation story and all that stuff, those are just figmentations of somebody's imagination, that kind of thing. When here, the apostle is giving credence to the story.
Right,
Literally
yeah.
saying, don't be like this, but be like this. And so the story is true.
The Hebrew
It's a true
account
story.
and Jude also refers to Cain and Abel. Back that a little.
Okay, I think that's right. There's like three references in the New Testament to Cain and Abel. This is one of them. And also, if you remember, Jack talked about Gnosticism at the time, and part of Gnosticism really glorified Cain. For that reason it was kind of an example for them, showing that the body and the deeds of the body were separate from the spirit. And so whatever you did with your body, God really didn't care about. He only cares about your spirit, and that's kind of the idea of Gnosticism. And they looked to Cain as some kind of example. So we talked about that. The word murder here, I have the ESV version, but if you have another translation, it might use the word slew. He slew him. Where that word comes from is sphazo in Greek, and that's often translated to slaughter or sacrifice as the murder too. So that's an interesting way to look at that. That Cain sacrificed Abel, and Abel not only being a victim, but maybe more martyrish, but also the sacrifice that Jesus was going to make as well. David, this is where David used that same word in Psalm 44, verse 22. Yet for your sake we are all killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. And that there was the same. So why did Cain do it? John tells us in here his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. But we can also take that a step further. Why were his deeds evil? He's influenced. He's under the influence of the devil. And can the devil influence people like that? Certainly. We have another example here in John 13, verse 2, when he talks about Judas. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So the devil has influence over the actions of people, and that's why Cain has done it. Verse 13, do not be surprised. Some translations may say, marvel not, that brothers, that the world hates you. So to be surprised, to be marveled, to wonder about, don't be surprised about this. Why would the world hate Christ, right? Because we have that influence of an adversary of Christ. If you think about it, it makes no sense for the world to hate Christ at all, right? The world should have loved Jesus. He was the highest, the best, the noblest human being of us all. He never hurt anyone. And so where did that hatred come from? It came from an adversary of Christ working within the world. And likewise, as Christians, as his followers, you would think we ought to be loved as well, right? We mean no harm. We bring no harm to anyone. And yet we are also persecuted, hated as Christ was as well.
Sounds like a classic bully. Cain is evil and Abel is righteous, so he's got to pull Abel down to his level. Same with Christ, they see him as better, so we've got to try to pull him down. I mean, that's what a bully does, right? Make everybody else come to your level so you look better.
And John, again, in his gospel, in chapter 15, verses 20 and 21, he recounts this as Jesus explained this to John. He said, remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. And that last phrase there is key. The world does not know the Father. They do not understand the Father. They do not understand the plan of salvation and Jesus' role in that. And so Jesus is saying they do not know the Father, therefore they hate the Son. They hate the Son, they hate the followers of the Son. So,
Well, Eric,
yes.
When the devil was sent to the world and he was given dominion over it.
Right, yes,
I mean,
yep.
he was.
God allows him
His
power here, yeah, for the time being.
Therefore, it makes sense if you think about it that people of the world and in the world are tremendously influenced by this being that is evil. And that would be the natural tendency if they were, in the world where the devil reigns, that they would act like him and do things that he would them to do. And that's why when Jesus was sent into the world, you're right, it was a totally different way of thinking about things, because the attention was taken off of the devil and put on God through Jesus. I think I
Yeah.
said that.
Yeah, no, very good.
And that's why.
All right. Thank you. Continuing on in verse 14, we know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death. So, one of the key words here, and John writes like this, he writes in this manner, he uses the word that, we should know, or we know, because of the evidence that he's giving us. And so we know that we have passed out of death into life. Why? Because we love the brothers. So he's starting to build this concept that love of the brothers is an example, it's evidence of our spiritual life and our salvation is what he's beginning to introduce that concept here, right? And he says it again, just in a different way, that the absence of love or hatred abides in death. Exactly the opposite. So what I want to stress too, what John is not saying here is that love is all that matters. That's not the point that he's trying to get across, or having love is more important than obedience to the law. Some people might understand that verse in that way, and that is not correct. But loving the brethren means that it's evidence that you love God, and if you love God, you will keep his commandments and obey him, and in that way you are welcomed into God's salvation plan. Okay? Yes?
I often wondered, did whoever the people that were to receive this book, I think it's more specific than John is writing, throwing it out there. I think there was a specific audience. Did they possibly have a problem loving the brother in the church? Is he trying to gently persuade them, if you really think you have eternal life, you're going to love each other, as we just sang. And it may have been a problem they weren't really exhibiting that love.
And this, right, and this is, there's a lot here in this verse to understand, and we'll even see in verse 16, things really start to get pretty real when we talk about loving the brethren. But, so I ask you this question here, about your understanding here, then, can we love God but not love the brethren? Is that okay? If I just have this relationship with God, that's all I need, he's providing my salvation, do I really need to love the brethren so much? Maybe, some of them really annoy me, and do I really need that? Right.
As a thing, or because you feel like a ship out there by yourself, and you can have God's love, but it's not complete until you have the payment. I think it's purpose for all of it. I think we need everything. Because the church is Christ in you.
Right. No,
Well, he had said just in the previous verse, right, verse 10, that if you don't love your brother, you're not of God.
You're not of
So
God.
He basically says you have to love your brother in order to love God.
I think that in the book of John, in the 38th chapter, he says, this is how people know that you love me, if you love one another.
Is the evidence. So I thought of a way to kind of understand this too a little bit better, and I thought of, imagine, because loving God is the highest form of love, right? So imagine you have someone that says, I can run a 3-hour marathon. And you're saying, oh, okay, well, that's pretty impressive, 3-hour marathon. I think that's Boston qualifying time, maybe. Maybe it's 2.5 hours now. But to run a marathon in 3 hours, you've got to run just under a 7-minute mile. So you go out, then you go outside and say, all right, let's go run a mile together. And then this person can't even finish a mile in 15 minutes, or it takes them 20 minutes. So it's like, well, wait a minute. You can't even run a mile in 20 minutes. There's no way that you can run a marathon in 3 hours like you claim. So, and that brought a lot of understanding to me that, hey, if you claim this higher level of love, but you don't have this lesser version of it, you don't really have the higher level of love. So.
Well, it's easy to claim something that people don't see. So it's interesting that this is a way that you can see. There's evidence there.
There's
that
evidence,
you love
yeah.
God because you're showing it to his people.
In skipping ahead just a little bit and stealing from a future lesson, 1 John 4, verse 20, if anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. So, and again, that made a lot more sense to me with that, maybe with that marathon running analogy. Verse 15, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. Now, why is John equating this? Hatred and murder. Jesus did the same thing. If you hate, you are a murderer. You've committed murder by this action of hate. Why are these the same thing?
Maybe because when you hate somebody, you're not abiding in Christ, and so you're murdering yourself in a way because you won't have life, you won't have life.
Well, you're definitely cutting off a relationship, right? Any other ideas?
In Matthew 5, Jesus equated anger to murder. It's not the same as hate, but maybe murder is just an extension of anger.
Yeah, I think I've got Matthew 5 here at the end, but yeah, you're right. They're really the same attitude, the same spirit. The murderer fulfills that desire. He carries out the action. And someone that just hates, they're one step away from fulfilling that. Maybe they have too much fear of the punishment of the law that they don't do it. Maybe they just lack the opportunity or the strength or the tools to which to carry it out. But the spirit and the attitude is the same. The desire is the same. And so I think everyone that has had children probably had a child that would get right up to the line, right up to the boundary of your rules. Or maybe you were one of those children for your parents that, let's see just how close I can get. And I think too, maybe that's what the hatred is doing. How close are you getting? And is that really obedience? Is that honoring your parents by seeing how close you can get away, how far you can push those rules?
Well, if you had my dad, you wouldn't have pushed it.
Right. Yep. So it's not a good place to be either, right? Being that one step away. And this is what Andrew was talking about in Matthew chapter 5. You have heard it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whosoever insults his brother will be liable to the evil counsel, or to the counsel, not the evil counsel. And whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire.
Couple of quick things. I can't have you on the Bible, but the word hates here is not just a passing dislike. This is a deep felt, calculated hatred. And that's the kind of thing that we are to be warned against, and we should help each other, warn each other against it. The other thing is, this whole section here is reminding us there's going to be a judgment day, and there's going to be a calling, however that's going to happen, a calling out of how we've lived and what we've done and what we should have done. And it should stand as a warning to us. You know, we're reading about love, and it's important, but we should always be reminded that judgment days are on the corner. Let's change our action, change the way of life.
Right. Make sure you are walking in the light, right? You don't want to be right at the edge, and one slip up, you're out of it. It's verse 16, and this is the one that, I mean, it's getting real now, right? In verse 16, by the way, by this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. So that's what I thought, man, this is getting real now. John's saying literally, you take him at his words, we should lay down our lives. We should give our life for a brother's life, if it comes to that. I mean, this is kind of the ultimate example, the ultimate expression of love. And you'll probably think, well, yeah, this is familiar. I know this, where this is kind of coming from. But I also found it interesting. There was we're talking about love versus hate. And we're talking about that sacrifice of Abel. He was slew. He was sacrificed by his brother, versus murder, right? And here John's saying we should self-sacrifice and not murder and not be a hater, but instead self-sacrifice, and we should love instead of hate.
Could we go back to your marathon illustration and say, you know, it's easy to say I would give my life for you, but how come I can't withstand maybe a misunderstanding or a hurt feeling or something on a lower level?
And I think, and John does this in the next verse too when we get to it. So he's starting off at the big one, right? Lay down your life. You should give your life. You should have so much love. And Jesus says too in John 15 verses 12 through 14, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. How did Jesus love us? He gave his life for us. That's the way he demonstrates his love for us. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. If you are my friends, if you do what I command. So you see this nice circle from this verse. Obey my commands, love each other, and you are my friends if you obey my commands. So we are to conform to the image of Christ. We are to be imitators of him. And John using this as the ultimate example. And then we go into verse 17 and say, okay, now we've had this giving up your life for someone that you love. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? And that's what Andrew was saying too. Now, you're not even helping out someone in need, your brother in need. You're definitely not going to give your life for that person as you are commanded to, as you should.
Rick, I think it's interesting too, is sometimes we look at need, we think, well, does that mean like, food, water, shelter, financial? But it might be caught in sin. Their need might be correction. And, sometimes we have close sin because there was some sin. We don't want to rock the boat, we don't want to shake anything up, we don't want to cause issues, but it's the same need as if it was basic necessities.
Right.
Spiritual needs are, it's all around, it's everything.
Could be.
It's love for that person who want to go to heaven, no matter what.
Yep. Could be spiritual needs, absolutely. In this verse, John does talk about the world's goods. Goods comes from the Greek word bios, meaning life, livelihood, or a living. And then he talks about seeing your brother in need, that is recognizing, having a conscience observation that this person needs something, needs my help, and then you decide, no, I'm not going to help him, even though I have the means to do so. So it's very obvious. It's not just like, oh, I didn't know your situation. It's that you do know the situation and you refuse to help. In this one, the love of God, the ESV doesn't use that. It uses God's love. Some translations use the love of God. And that can be a little bit confusing. What does the love of God mean? Is it talking about God's kind of love, or is it our love towards God? And the the first understanding is the correct one. So it's God's kind of love, the love of God. How does the love of God abide in him if he does not even help out? So that high level, the highest, purest form of love. Some people think that they have this higher type of love, but again, if it doesn't manifest itself in the easier, simpler forms, it just can't. It just can't exist. It's not possible.
Over in John 4:20, it says, if someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he's not seen?
Yep. That makes exactly the point.
In Deuteronomy, it says, if there's a poor man with you, one of your brothers, in any of your towns living in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother. Deuteronomy 15.
So even before, pre-New Testament, pre-gospel, but you're there to help their brothers, help those in need, and demonstrate love. Verse 18, little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Here John is kind of guarding against hypocrisy. Don't just say it, right? Love is an intangible thing. It's not able to be seen. We must witness the deeds to understand it, to observe it, to experience it. So you can see the parallels that he draws here. He's talking about word and deed, linking those two together. He's also talking about talk. Some translations have tongue and truth, right? This is unfeigned love. We can pretend to love someone. We can be boastful or bragging about love. That is not what John is suggesting here. He is suggesting the opposite. Stay away from that. And in James 2, verses 15 and 16, if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things they need for the body, what good is that? Okay, and that kind of illustrates John's point as well in this verse. I like this summary I got out of one of the commentaries. It just kind of gives us this little chunk that we just studied, verses 11 through 18, just kind of putting it in some more common words. But if we think about it, in the beginning of the gospel, we were told to love one another. We should not be as the murderer Cain, who slew his brother because Abel's works were righteous. Cain was motivated by the evil one instead of by love. Today, all the Cains of the world hates Christians, and we should not wonder at that. The world loves its own and is prejudiced towards those who are different. We have passed into life when we love. A hater is a murderer and abides in death. True love lays down its life for its brethren. And it is not a word or tongue type of love. It exists in actions and more, in truth and reality. This type of love gives what a brother needs, and it does not confine, stifle, or shut up compassion. And I thought that was just a very succinct way of kind of saying it in a little bit different way. Now, the last portion that we're going to study tonight in verses 19 through 24, the last 5 verses, I've titled this Our Assurance of Abiding in Christ. Again, another thing that John likes to do. He gives us that assurance, right? He offers the evidence so that we know and we're assured of our abiding in Christ. So what's John's message for us here in these 5 verses? And it's really that walking with Christ in the light of his word. He uses present tense of walking, suggesting we have a continuing relationship, not just something that we do once and that, we're saved and we've established this relationship with God, and then that's it. We don't really work on it anymore. It's a continual thing. So here's I think I got all of them on this slide here, and I just want to talk about the highlighted parts. By this we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure our heart before him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God, and whenever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments, that we believe in the name of the Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he has commanded us. Whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, and God in him. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. So that first highlighted word, know, those that have a good conscience and a correct attitude want to know where they stand with God. Okay? If you know you don't have a good relationship, you don't want to know, right? If there's something fractured there, or your relationship is strained, maybe you shy away from that. I kind of think of it as if you ever had to get job performance appraisals, and if you knew you're kind of doing a bad job, you didn't want to go to those. But if you're doing a good job and you wanted to hear what your manager might have to say about you. The truth here that he talks about, that we are of the truth and reassure our hearts, that's the proof, and the proof reassures our heart. So that what John is getting at is that, our heart here can really start to be the center of emotions that maybe in the moment we think our relationship with God isn't as good as it is, and he's saying here too, here's the proof to prove to your heart, where you stand with God, and remember that even though your heart may be telling you that you are condemned or you're not good enough to have this relationship with God, God is greater than our hearts. And that took me a little bit of studying to understand that, that whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our hearts. So your relationship with God does not depend on how you feel at the given moment. God has given us as Christians ample reason to know that we belong to him, that even when the heart condemns us or when doubts or uncertainties arise, God's promise outweighs those feelings. And I just wanted to end here today actually with some thoughts from Paul in Romans 8 and verse 16. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And that reassuring verse that Paul gives us tonight. Yes, Sarah?
About the heart, and that takes me back to Matthew 5 and the Beatitudes. And because God looks at our heart, he's constantly looking at our heart. The back one is blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And that, I think, is something we have to strive for constantly and keep thinking about, because we
That's right. Yep, and that's what we mentioned it a little bit there too, right? The love of God then encourages you, and that your actions, right, is keeping the commands, and that is also another proof of your love for Him. All right. Well, thank you very much. I thank you for your participation tonight.